My guest today is Crystal Goins, a mom of five and founder of Heartwise Scholars Microschool in Chesapeake, Virginia. A public school teacher for over 13 years, Crystal joined the KaiPod Catalyst Microschool Accelerator program last year to help get her microschool off the ground and opened in August. She shares insights and information for parents and teachers at her website, theresilientteachermom.com. Crystal, welcome to the Liberated Podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
I'm so glad that you're here. I'm thrilled to meet you and to be able to hear your story. Starting with your pathway to becoming a public school teacher for more than a decade. What led you into teaching, into education to begin with? And what was your experience like in the conventional system?
I've always wanted to be a teacher. Actually, my family were Filipino. My parents are immigrants, and I was watching the Disney Teaching Awards, and I said, I want to be that. And my dad said, okay, well, what are you good at? And I said, I think I can be good at that. And he said, well, I said, what's the other thing you're good at? And I said, well, I can vacuum. And he's like, well, a maid or a teacher? I said, I'd rather be a teacher. So I worked on that dream. I went to Virginia Tech. I knew that. Went to a 5-year early childhood education program. I worked Title I right out of school, and that was my passion too. Because with my upbringing, my parents always worked 2 or 4 jobs, growing up, and so I wanted to help the families who didn't have access to education kind of get the quality education I always knew my parents wanted for me. And so I did that for 9 years in 2 different districts in Virginia and one district in South Carolina. Yeah.
Yeah, and what was that experience like? Your maybe what you had expected teaching to be, what it turned out to be. What was that? What were sort of some of the ups and downs of those 13 years of teaching?
Um, it's you're kind of like a lone wolf sometimes in the journey, depending on you never can you can get all the training in the world, but once you get those kids in that classroom, you never really know what you're gonna expect, especially in terms of classroom management. So right now, that's kind of my wheelhouse is classroom management and relationship-based classroom management, but that is because I really kind of sucked at it at first. You know, it was hard for me as a young college student to know, I thought the kids I babysat, I nannied, I was a camp counselor. I thought that naturally they would just listen to me, but it doesn't work that way. You have to have a relationship with them first, and navigating discipline and parents and all of that was really hard. In the pandemic, it was just different. You got virtual, you got in person, you're tasked with virtual tasks and in person tasks, once you go in. And then when the kids came back from being isolated or at home, they didn't have any social skills. There were so many rules of like how many feet they should be apart, masks and it was just very overwhelming. But I mean, I loved my job. I loved my job in the public schools. I think it was more of like I was on this mission to be that lone wolf because I knew families and children needed me. And so I was out to do that mission, whatever it took. I would train, go to the trainings myself. I would stay late if I needed to as a mom. So I was a mom teaching since 2016. And my coworkers used to joke on me because I'd be on maternity leave like all the time. But that didn't change anything. I would always just create systems to manage my classroom and, my mothering. And the more I had kids at home, the more my passion was to serve kids and families in the classroom. So I made my systems stronger and more aligned with relationships.
I love that. I love how your role as a mom, and as I mentioned in the intro, you're a mom of five, informed and really elevated your teaching and made you even more committed to working with students and families. So then, what prompted you to leave the conventional system and ultimately open a microschool? What was that path?
Well, at the time, when you have 5 kids, my husband works healthcare. Well, that's 12-hour shifts, 20 shifts a month. And so it was required really for us to manage it, for my youngest to be at daycare and the other four to be at private school. Well, that's about $5,000 a month of tuition. Well, one of my sons, it just wasn't fitting. It wasn't working out. And so when I pulled him, that's why I left. Um, in my area, there were a long waiting list for counseling and there were long waiting lists for testing. And he was one that needed both. And so it was imperative for me to kind of leave my dream job and take care of my son. But my family always comes first. And the ones who mentored me in the school system always told me my family comes first. So it was an easy decision, but I knew in terms of like meeting my son, I didn't also want to divide my family. So once my son came home, me and my husband made the decision to homeschool them all by the next fall. But the only thing we knew is they all came from conventional, schooling, that we wanted them to be in a community of friends. And then in my email, here comes this KaiPod Catalyst opportunity. And
Really? Just
yes, I
out of
guess
the blue, or
out
how
of the
did you
blue.
connect? Okay.
It was just out of the blue. I finished my dissertation last May. So I'm constantly on
Congratulations.
the thank you, writing my dissertation to try to finish this degree. And then it showed up in my email randomly. And so I applied. I didn't know where it was going to lead, but then I thought it had planted the seed of would there be an opportunity for me to homeschool my own children, still keep my dream job, but also help other families who kind of work or in my shoes. And so, and the answer is yeah, you can do it. So
Yes, I love that. And of course, I'm always interviewing KaiPod Catalyst founders on this show. There's now so many of them. KaiPod Catalyst, a wonderful microschool accelerator program that enables would-be founders, many of whom are former public school teachers like you, to come together and get kind of access to community and connection and inspiration and information, as well as sort of that back end operational support for what it takes to run a small business, which is what it is really running a new school is really like. It's really
yeah,
about creating that kind of business savviness
yes.
that iPod Catalyst provides. So you were part of the February 2024 KaiPod Catalyst cohort, and what did that experience give to you?
I don't really live in a very progressive area, so it was everything for me. Because part of the reason why I love being in my doctoral program is because you finally were in the room with like-minded people when sometimes you felt so alone because of how you think and how you operate. And then when I joined the group, it, was like my people, like you're just as crazy as I am. Let's do this, optimistic. And like you had said, you celebrate your highs and lows. You have a support community who is going to come around you. If you have a question, you put it in, the chat that has my name, and someone who has the answer that you may not even know who that angel is will come and answer you. And then you have the other ones, the other founders who've gone before me. So like Mercedes Grant is in my area. So to see that she started in Yorktown kind of gave me this vicarious experience where I'm like, oh my gosh, it's just in Yorktown. Oh, okay, we can do this. And so I think it made things possible for me in my mind and heart because you can't make decisions sometimes unless your mind is like, kind of being fed and your heart's being fed in that direction. But I didn't really, as hard as decision making was, it truly was the catalyst of me making the next choice. And that was really important because when you're a founder, there are some scary choices you have to make. And honestly, nobody can tell where it's going to end up, but you got to be okay taking those risks and making the next choice.
So what were some of those scary choices for you?
Well, I'm very much by the books. I would go through the manual. I do this and I check it off. It was the scariest thing was the city. Like I thought, oh, well, just because the previous location I thought was textbook savvy. They were a school at one point. They were owned by a church. It was event rentals. They do weddings and they're a family life center. Like it's a no-brainer. So then when I showed up for my business license and they told me their conditional use permit was like expired in the 90s and that I would have to go through the whole process over again. I was so defeated. And then coming back to the house, I said, I've got such, 5 acres. I've got this barn. We can even do it in the barn. And had all these dreams, and everybody would step on my dreams when it came to like what was legal in the city. And and I didn't know that. And that's not something KaiPod could tell you because it's state specific and city specific. And so those were things that I had to navigate on my own. But at the same time, once I learned the lessons and I took it back to the group, like when you are founding, I am a homeschool tutoring and enrichment program, according to the city. Nobody really knows what the microschool word means. It's very gray. But once you know the language that is accepted in your city, doors start to open because, it's almost like you're talking a different language a lot of the time when you're starting to open, but it truly is who I am and call it whatever you want. That's what I do. But I would take it back and that feedback could help someone else in my area but it was a community that was supportive, but I knew there were some spaces that I would have to go alone. Those were the spaces that were the scariest, but then taking it back to the group, we found a community, that we were always trying to strive to help the next founder understand those things, which I think is how the world should be. We should be helping each other out.
Yeah, I just love that because, it's up to you as the founder, as the entrepreneur to deal with these regulatory hurdles and figure out, the location and comply with the local codes and all of that. But having a cohort or a community like the KaiPi Catalyst program just makes it so much easier, right? That you have people who can say, look, I can't help you day to day with this, but I can be there to cheer you on. I can be there to kind of hear your frustrations and then, like you said, be a source of inspiration and information for future founders too, because this is certainly a common experience. And I think largely has to do with what you mentioned, is just that language hasn't necessarily caught up to the culture, especially around innovative education models like microschools. So you dealt with some of those headaches, and then we're set to launch in August of 2024 as
Yes.
an in-home program. I wonder if you can
Yes.
tell us a little bit about your launch and what those early days were like.
Legally, I can only serve my kids and 4 other kids in my home. And I have 5, and then I have these 3 miraculous families who were like, we'll do this. They were on board from the get-go. And so
Can I just, I'm sorry, not to, I want to hear the rest of this, but I have another question for, how did you get those initial 3 families? What was your strategy?
one came from was the best friend of my son who came from their previous school. One
Okay.
I do ministry with. So me and my husband are young life leaders, and I've known them, I mean, for over 8 years, and they have 2 twin girls looking for their mom used to do nonprofit and she has an educational degree. And so she knew what it was like to start a new option, but she loved everything about our mission. She's on my board. And then I found one from the Facebook group.
You created a Facebook group.
No, I did a homeschool Facebook group and, was messaging people just like they
Okay.
tell you on
Yeah.
KaiPod. And it just so happens that she's connected with my neighbor across the street that also homeschools and she has to work and she liked, talking to us and our kids got along. So she said, yeah, let's try it. So
So great. Okay, so I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just
it's
wanted to
okay.
hear how you got those initial families, which can sometimes feel really daunting for new founders. So,
Yeah.
so you opened with 9, which was the
Yeah.
max you could have. Your
Yeah.
5 children and then 4 others.
Yeah.
What were those early days of launch like?
Day by day. We also knew we wanted to launch as a Monday through Thursday option because of the wellness of our teachers and families and kids, leaving Friday off. And that's not popular even in the micro school field because they'll have some sort of half day option for working families. But within the first day, me and my other teacher OSIers are like, no Fridays. Just because every day you feel like you're just figuring it out together. the fact that we're in a home and the fact that, your classmates are all siblings. Siblings have a different dynamic socially. And so it was a lot of figuring out, also a lot of comparisons. Like, oh, this happens in homeschooling too? Because I'm pretty sure I see this in public school or my kids in private school had talked about this. So just making, similarities. And I went on a Zoom call that first week when I launched, and I said something about like, wow, you even have to do like classroom management stuff, like even in microschool. And a couple of them were laughing and they're like, yes, So some of the things that I thought would naturally, they would just cohesively naturally be a community. It didn't really go away because, you have to still manage your classroom. You still have to communicate with your teachers. You still have to have systems in place. And it was a lot easier because everything happens really quick. You don't have to wait a week. They get things in a day. They're ready to transition. You put your classroom management plan, you would say in the public school, that would take 3 weeks. It took 3 days. So we end up, the launch, it was beautiful. It gave me so much freedom in terms of because things were happening faster, because relationships were more authentic and more
Mm,
intimate. I was able to, we only did academics basically 2 days a week. We started going to the library on Tuesdays. Solstice. Sarah is another founder. I did not know what to do with field trips. I said, Sarah, can we please go on the STEM field trips with you? So by October, we were doing her Wednesday science STEM field trip with her. So we were going on a field trip Wednesday afternoons. We're going to the library every Tuesday. And then we were doing learning on Monday and Thursdays. And so it felt like everything I didn't know homeschooling could be like. Um, and so
yeah.
that's why too, I was like, we are definitely a homeschool option because we have so much freedom to individualize their education. I had learners all on individual plans, but then in a community together, it was yappy. We're conversating all the time. We're going out in the community. And then even with the preschoolers, once a month, we would go out and do like a whole group field trip with them. So we'd go to the farm. We went to Nutcracker Play. And we had a lot of meals together, which doesn't seem like a big deal because conventional schooling has lunch. But no, it was like family meals together. It felt
Mm.
like a family meal together around the table, which is different. We get to know each other.
So you have a mixed age microschool, like many microschools, serving ages 3 to 11, but I know you're expanding into the higher grades. And what was the curriculum like? What did you do for curriculum on those two academic days? And how did you sort of differentiate learning given the wide age span?
So my pre-K, the first one I hired is a Montessori teacher, Osiris. So pre-K is actually her Montessori full out, the shelves, the curriculum and everything. She was my kid's Montessori teacher. I did that on purpose because we're a relationship-based school, big on social emotional learning, restorative practices, and relationship-based classroom management. And so it's important to equip them with those social emotional skills in the room. And Montessori does that. There's no screens, it's hands-on, it's building the individual. So that was an easy one. Osiris, take it. I know what you do. I have those kids. They're my kids. The K5, I was even a little intimidated by it, but it was very important that I had adaptive curriculum. So I use Lexia, which is adapted K through 5, and I use Zern, which is adapted K through 8. I did that on purpose because I have a lot of high learners as well. So once they took the placement test, it was whatever lesson they were on. And I just read their reports and kept track of their learning that way. To supplement that, I knew that they needed to be in books. So I put that in my schedule. And for the ones who are ready, the fifth grader, she's actually, that was something she celebrated. She's been reading Little Women And it's been taking her, it's a novel and they don't talk the same way that we talk now. And so it's taken her some time, but I would not let her watch the movies. We talk about vocabulary and summarizing it, but that was going on the back end. And my boys, when they first started, they started The Wild Robot, and we mapped it out so that we would do it up into the release of the movie. So we did it up into the release of the movie. And, they did, I mean, my son got really into it and did like clay models of like his favorite scenes. And they did like a little book study. And then the other ones were still beginning readers. So I was still meeting with them, on their books, on their own. But the fact that they had an adaptive curriculum on the tech saved me a lot of time. And I believe in the science of reading where it has to be kind of systematic. And I believe the computer was more systematic than if I had a TA, maybe she called in sick or maybe she got distracted with the kid here. The computer doesn't, do that. It's very systematic and doesn't let them move on. So that's what I appreciate about it. And then Zern, it required some paper, pencil, and some computer. And then at the end, it had an exit ticket where I had to check one word problem and two other problems, which was manageable for me since I'm K5. So I was able to check that and build a system and routine about that with their curriculum. And I would supplement with like math puzzles, like 100 chart math puzzles or different skill, practice with that. But again, depending on the learner, even that went away if it wasn't something of interest. And then science and social studies was more literature based. They told me flat out they loved history, but they hated memorizing facts. They said it was so boring. And I actually had picked them something very similar to that. And so I didn't even show them. And so I just have been trying to fill it up with literature. And then with science, we did mystery science. But when I went to a conference, the hybrid conference, I think we're moving more towards project-based learning because right now I have K, second, third, fourth, and fifth. And mystery science is grade level organized, and having that many grade level groups is not very manageable. But when I do project-based learning, I have a K2 founders group and I have a 3-5 founders group. And we would only work on 4 projects a year and they would work collaboratively on those projects, which I think works more with my group.
I love that. And I love the leveraging of both kind of digital and real world tools and some of these lovely ed tech tools, the
Yeah.
curriculum tools like Zern and Lexia for math and reading, respectively, and mystery science, some others that you mentioned that are widely used in conventional schools and homeschooling and microschooling, all kinds of different learning environments. What have you found, Crystal, to be some of the biggest sort of eye openers for you in terms of looking at teaching and learning in a microschooling environment compared to your experience in a conventional classroom?
They're just not academic robots. Like I think I was programmed that it's academics all the time. But when I started going to the library and taking them to plays and going on these field trips, that was just one piece of the puzzle. I ended up moving my K5 pod to a learning center in town. And that opened a whole new can of worms because I couldn't always transport them. But half of their day is academic, but now half of their day is enrichment. Because I realized if my mission was to serve the whole child, that's 7 hours of the day where if it's not all, if they're not just an academic robot, well, then what are they? Oh, they're human. They have life skills, they have other interests, education or academics can be very competitive. I don't know why it ended up to be that way, but kids nowadays compete against each other on levels and because I'm a mixed grade level, it doesn't matter, but I still have chunks of kids in the same grade level that can kind of feel competitive. So enrichments balance that out. Oh, you have other skills. There are other things you can learn. So we do Spanish, we do cooking, we do music. We just had a crochet workshop, Those are all things that I'm starting now that I didn't have the chance to grow a whole child. That while the parent works, I can tell you he can do academics and he can cook. he could do academics, and he's in his arts, you know? And I love that because I think the pandemic robbed a lot of those opportunities. And because of the gaps, I got robbed of that as well, teaching and being a mother, because I have to work, but I have to fill those gaps. And so I never appreciated the community aspect in building the whole child in terms of those enrichments until I got into this option. And now I like protect it. I'm so protective of making sure that it's a balance.
Ah, so great. So, yeah, there's already been some great changes for you, and you're not even a complete academic year in, but you started with 9 students, including 5 of your own. Now you're at 17 students. You
Yes,
have 2 locations now, as you alluded to, sort of the preschool being more home-based, the
yeah,
learning center for the upper grades.
yeah.
Um, what does it look like now, in those 2 spaces?
So the preschool now we gave them our bigger K-5 classroom. And so their other classroom now is like a sensory room, puzzles,
Mm.
Legos, everything hands-on, but more play-based. And they have a community room where they eat lunch and snack, and but they have toys there as well when they wake up from nap. My K-5 center, again, enrichments and academics, but I also realize I need to make sure because they're in this building. I hate it in the conventional classroom that we're always inside. They're still
Mm.
inside because they're in a learning center, but they have a lot of passions. They have a lot of passion projects. And so being the mom outside of the option, I realize they're picking up hobbies and passions because they're homeschooled. So we
Mm.
bring that into the center. We say we slay on Mondays and Wednesdays because we do academics, but we play on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And we have enrichments every afternoon, but Monday and Wednesdays is all academics all the time. But on play days, my kids named it. They call it Ohana time. We let them have
Mm.
a study hall in the morning meeting, and then they have this Ohana time where they bring their passion projects in the center, drawing, sketching, crocheting, Lego stop motion videos, models like military models, Lego creations. And that's all of them. And that's a beautiful thing because I think sometimes they feel robbed because they never get a choice in what they get to work on. But I meet them, and that's how I motivate them to, still be a team and want to be in our option, is I leave them space and protect it for them to work on things on their own. And what has that led to? It's led to stronger individuals and confidence. But
Mm.
now my girls who crochet, they've spread it. That's why we had the crochet workshop. Even my boys were crocheting. I had 11 students crocheting in that workshop. Now the girls want to do a business. So we are doing entrepreneurship. And then the other thing is too, they're starting to celebrate each other. So things that kids do at home, but no one ever gets to see, we circle up and we talk about our Ohana progress. And kids are
Mm.
saying, wow, that's really cool, and they're asking them questions. So things that seem so private just because they want to do something, now they're getting to share a piece of themselves in a different way. And they don't have to engage in a conversation. Kids are just getting to see them kind of excel in something on their own.
So you've nearly doubled in size again, and the year isn't over. What has attracted these newer families to your program?
I think it's the relationship-based aspect. We don't do rewards or treats. There's nothing fancy. We're just a really tight-knit community that has kind of really everyone has come through some personal referral.
Interesting.
Whether the
Yeah.
last one was someone I'd worked with in the school system, and it was her neighbor. And she referred me to her, and she was a great fit. The last one, actually, the one before her was a teacher I worked with and gave training. I used to do professional development, and she would always come to my training. And so she checked us out. And then another one's same. They went to the school, same Montessori. So they're coming to me because of some sort of relationship that they've invested in that has come into the room. So
Mm. So what's next? What does fall look like? I know you have plans at some point to expand into middle and high school ages. What is the future?
right now Like right now with 17, we're in a good spot. We're opening our first summer camps.
Mm,
And so we have a crochet and smoothies camp, an entrepreneurship camp. We're getting ourselves out there in the middle school space. We're doing a middle school STEAM camp, and then
mm,
5 social clubs, which is basically a version of what we do every day, but without the academics. We're starting there first because me and my husband, we're very big on taking care of the families in the room. So we're looking, most people don't know this, but we're not like your typical private school. In micro schools, you have to have a certain fit, and it's
mm.
okay if we're not a good fit, but it's important that you're so small, you're such a tight-knit community that it would have to be the right fit. So the capacity at the Learning Center is 20. I
Mm,
have a couple more enrichment partners coming up. So I have community partners with a music business, an art business, and a social communication therapy business. So all of
mm.
those things come already to my option. But we have a partnership with a nature school twice a week as well. So I'll have 3 spots that can go for pre-KK, and then I have 7 spots that go first through fifth. So I'm right now, my next thing is not more so enrollment because I feel like if people come to me and we're a good fit and I'm not at capacity and you think that, my program can serve your family, we think the same thing. Let's do it. But
Mm.
right now, I'm working on building my program for different learning pathways. So, like if they have a nature-based enrichment, my homeschool community here is so vast and so knowledgeable. So I would love like there's a sewing enrichment, there's a carpentry enrichment. I would love to have more community partners. So then as I do fill the seats in my micro school, then I'm making sure that it's personalized to the scholar in the room and making sure that family and that scholar gets the opportunities in the community that they need.
Terrific. So the microschool website is heartwisescholars.com, but you also are an education entrepreneur in sort of multifaceted ways. You have your other website, which is the resilientteachermom.com, where you can also connect to the school, but it's even more than that, where you're providing more information, resources for parents and teachers. I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about that program.
So I was Mother Goins before I was the Resilient Teacher Mom. I'm the author of the book When Relationships Matter, a social emotional approach to teaching and learning. And I published that in 2021 when I was just a teacher. But my story is different because, like I said, every time I mothered another child at home, I realized how different a child is. And it changed me to be more relationship based in the classroom. And so that whole pedagogy is something I've been devoted to, which got me into the doctoral program. So I collected research on how that approach is embedded in social motivation theory, kind of more of an interactionalist way of classroom management versus an interventionist. I believe that every child has a social influence in the room and that I don't always have control over it. I can control my social influence. I can influence their social influence, but the environment and the goals in the room actually help, kind of manage that classroom as well. And so I have my story as the resilient teacher mom, because managing being a conventional teacher, being a mom, I must have changed schools and jobs probably 3 or 4 times in the pandemic. The only reason why I finished my degrees is because I was on scholarship. And so if I was given an opportunity to finish it for free, I'm going to take that opportunity. And then I have a consultant business, Teachers as Partners, is where I train teachers on that relationship-based classroom management
Mm.
approach because it starts with self, then it starts with the job, and then it starts with the community. And my micro school is my dream school out of being an edupreneur and a teacher for my kids. Like I couldn't find that for my kids. And so I thought, well, I want a network of scholars aged 3 to 18 who take care of themselves, the community, in the world. And so that's what Heartwise Scholars is. If I can't find it, then I'll create it.
Ah, I love it. I love that spirit of entrepreneurship, of I can't find it, so I'll build it. I mean, that's what I think really is the defining characteristic of this entrepreneurial movement of parents and teachers like you creating these innovative learning environments. So, what advice would you give to someone listening, a parent, a teacher, both, who is looking to start a new learning environment, kind of reflecting back now on your entrepreneurial journey so far? What tips would you give them to get going?
Um, this was not my advice. The best people who spoke in my life always told me that I was my kid's advocate, my own personal child's advocate, which only empowered me to be the advocate for all children. That's one. The other thing is, even though this is a business, don't lose the fact that you are still a mom and a teacher with a vision and a dream. And to make sure that that vision and dream is still yours, you get a lot of voices in this. You're a small option. And because you're a small option, you've got a lot of people invested in the room, but they're invested in the initial vision and that mission that you want to carry out. And if you lose sight of that mission and lose sight of who you are when you started all this, that can be lost very quickly. So I just say stay true to your mission and your vision and your dream and who you are. For me, I'm very motivated by being that mother teacher. So if you are motivated by being that educator or being that parent, make sure you're just true to your why and the rest of it will come. Don't worry, it will come. It's very rocky, but it will come.
And it's easier if you have a community of
Very much so.
entrepreneurs with you or a network of support. And I think there's so many more programs like Kaipai Catalyst
Yep.
now. I share many of these resources here in the podcast of just being able to connect with other founders and have that camaraderie and have that encouragement and support when you really need it. So, Crystal, share with us again the best way for listeners and followers to connect with you, to learn more about your various offerings and services, follow your journey. How can they do that?
So my email is crystal at theresilientteachermom.com, the longest email in the world. But my website, theresilientteachermom.com, it has all the links to my school and my consultant business and my story. I write on Medium. After the Learning Center, I took a little hiatus because I started that up. We've been operating there for 3 months, but that's kind of my therapy and how I process things in the world as I write. And I'm on Facebook as well, Crystal Goins, Heartwise Scholars, The Resilient Teacher Mom, so many places. You can always contact me either way.
Well, this has been a lovely conversation. So glad we were able to connect. I look forward to following along on your progress and seeing the growth and continued success of your microschool, which is going to expand into the upper grades before long, and your other entrepreneurial pursuits. So, Crystal Goins, thank you so much for being on the Liberated podcast.
Thank you, Kerry. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful day. Happy Cinco de Mayo.